The wind carried the scent of dust and sagebrush across the dry plains, whispering through the weathered fences that marked the boundaries of an old ranch sitting on the edge of a small American village. The year was 1889. The town of Willow Creek was a place where everyone knew everyone, where the church bell told time better than any clock, and where gossip traveled faster than the stagecoach that came in every Thursday. Life moved slow there, steady as a horse's gait, until one quiet afternoon when everything changed for the man who thought he had seen it all. The rancher stood on his porch, squinting into the sunlight. The day had been long, fixing a broken gate, branding cattle, and mending fences that seemed to break more often than they held. He was a man shaped by loss and land, both of which left their marks deep. Since his wife's passing 2 winters ago, the ranch had grown quieter, the laughter gone, the evenings longer. His world had shrunk to the rhythm of hooves, the creak of leather, and the lowing of cattle at dusk. He wasn't a cruel man, nor was he especially warm. Folks in town called him fair, though some whispered that he carried sorrow like a shadow that never left. He didn't much mind what people thought. He kept to himself, as ranchers often did. But that afternoon, when the knock came at his door, it broke the silence in a way he couldn't have expected. It wasn't the kind of knock he was used to, hesitant, but with a strength behind it, as if the one knocking wasn't sure they belonged there but refused to walk away. He wiped his hands on his worn trousers and opened the door. Standing before him was a young girl, no more than 14. Her dress faded from travel and her shoes coated with the fine dust of the prairie road. Her hair hung loose around her face, dark and tangled from the wind, but it was her eyes that caught him, dark, frightened, and fierce all at once. "Sir," she said, her voice trembling but steady enough to hold meaning. "They abused my mama for being Chinese." The words hit him like a gunshot. He blinked, not sure he'd heard right. Out here, in this part of the country, Chinese families were few and far between. The railroad workers had passed through years ago, most leaving once the line was done, driven away by the same kind of cruelty that hung behind the girl's words. He looked past her, expecting to see someone else, a parent, a wagon, anyone. But the road was empty. Only the wind moved. "Where's your mama?" he asked quietly. The girl swallowed hard. Her hands clutched the strap of a small cloth bag slung over her shoulder. "She's hurt," she said. They wouldn't let her stay in town. "I was told to find you." The rancher frowned, his mind racing through names, faces, and reasons why a stranger's daughter would be sent to him. He had no dealings with Chinese families, no connections that he knew of, but something in her eyes stopped him from turning her away. They were eyes that had seen too much for someone her age. He stepped aside and gestured her in. The girl hesitated at the threshold, looking as if crossing that line might cost her something. But then she stepped inside, and the door shut behind her with a hollow thud. The house was simple, a wooden table, a few chairs, a stone hearth cold from neglect. The girl stood by the door, twisting the edge of her sleeve. The rancher poured her a cup of water and set it on the table. She stared at it for a moment before drinking, her hands shaking so slightly he almost didn't notice. "What happened to your mother?" he asked, keeping his voice even. "They said she didn't belong," the girl murmured. "She cleaned houses for some folks in town. But then someone accused her of stealing food. She didn't. She never would. They dragged her out of the place and said if she came back, they'd—" She stopped, her throat tight, her words caught somewhere between anger and grief. He felt a slow heaviness settle in his chest. The cruelty of people never seemed to run out, especially when directed toward those who looked different or spoke in accents the town didn't understand. "Where is she now?" he asked again. The girl's voice dropped to a whisper. "By the river. She told me to go before they found her again. She said you'd help." He leaned back, brow furrowed. "Me? Why me?" The girl shook her head. "She said you owed her." The room went still. He searched his memory, but nothing came. No face, no promise, no debt owed to any woman, Chinese or otherwise. Yet there was something in the way the girl spoke, something certain. It wasn't a plea. It was a statement. As if her mother had trusted that somehow, even across the years and silence, he would remember. He rubbed his jaw, the stubble rough beneath his fingers. "What's your mama's name?" She hesitated. "Maylin?" The name stirred a faint echo in his mind, something buried deep beneath time and dust. A flash of memory, years ago when he was a younger man working cattle near the rail line, helping move supplies for the workers. There had been a woman who made meals for the men, quiet but kind, with a laugh that could soften a day's exhaustion. She'd given him water once after a long ride in the heat. He remembered the small scar above her wrist, shaped like a crescent moon. But that was long ago, before he ever had a wife, before the land had hardened him. He stood suddenly. "Stay here," he said. "I'll get my horse." The girl looked up, startled. "You believe me?" He paused at the door, his hand resting on the worn wood. "I believe no one should be left to die by a river because of someone else's hate." Outside, the wind had grown colder. The sky turned the color of pewter as clouds rolled in from the west. He saddled his horse quickly, his mind heavy with questions. Why would Mei Lin send her daughter here, of all places? Why now, after all these years? And what did she mean when she said he owed her? He rode toward the river, the girl clinging behind him. The trail wound through stretches of wild grass and sage, the air thick with the promise of rain. The closer they got, the quieter she became. When they reached the bend near the water, he slowed his horse and dismounted. "Is this where you left her?" he asked. The girl nodded. "By the rocks." He scanned the area, but there was no one in sight. The only sound was the river moving slow and steady, carrying pieces of the afternoon sky in its ripples. Then, just as he was about to call out, he saw it. A torn piece of fabric caught on a bush near the water's edge. Pale blue, like the kind of dress someone might wear to Sunday service. He took a step forward, then froze. There was something else, a faint shape near the shore, half hidden by reeds. His stomach turned as he walked closer, the girl following behind him. But before he could reach it, a voice came from the trees. "Don't move, rancher." He turned sharply, his hand instinctively brushing the revolver at his side. A man stood there dressed in a deputy's badge, his face shadowed beneath a hat. The expression on his face was hard, unyielding. "That woman by the river," the deputy said coldly. "You best stay out of it. She brought trouble here, and so will you if you don't turn back." The girl's hand clutched his coat, trembling. The rancher's eyes narrowed as the first drops of rain began to fall, tapping softly against the brim of his hat. He looked from the deputy to the girl, then back toward the river where the wind rippled through the reeds. Somewhere beneath it all, a secret waited, one tied to a past he'd long tried to forget. And in that moment, as thunder rolled across the prairie, he realized this was no simple plea for help. It was the beginning of something that would unravel everything he thought he knew. The girl's voice broke the silence, barely more than a whisper. "Please, don't let them take her again." The rancher tightened his grip on the reins, his jaw set, and said nothing. The storm gathered above them, dark and heavy, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The rain came harder as they stood there by the river, the wind twisting through the grass in restless waves. The rancher kept his eyes on the deputy, trying to read the man's expression beneath the shadow of his hat. There was something too deliberate in his stance, something that told the rancher this wasn't just about a stranger's trouble, it was about something deeper. The town didn't want seen. "I don't take kindly to being told what to do on my own land," the rancher said slowly, his voice steady despite the tension. The deputy's jaw flexed. "This ain't about land, it's about keeping peace. That woman stirred up folks in town and now she's gone missing. You'd be wise not to stick your neck in it." He tipped his hat and turned to leave, boots crunching in the wet soil. But before he disappeared through the trees, he looked back once more. "You bring that girl around town, folks will talk. Best send her back where she came from." The rancher waited until the sound of hooves faded before he spoke. "He's lying," the girl said quietly, her voice trembling from cold and fear. "I know," he answered, his eyes scanning the riverside again. The shape by the water was gone now, washed or dragged away. Only the fabric scrap remained, fluttering in the wind like a ghost of what had been. He bent to pick it up, feeling the coarse weave between his fingers. It wasn't just a piece of cloth, it was proof that she had been there. They rode back through the storm, neither saying much. The girl held on tight, her cheek pressed against his coat, and he could feel her shivering. When they reached the ranch, the lamps inside flickered weakly against the dark. He led the horse into the barn, dried it down, then went inside and found her staring into the fire he'd built. She looked smaller now, wrapped in one of his late wife's shawls, her eyes following the flames like they might tell her what to do next. He poured her some warm milk, set it beside her, and sat down across the room. "What did your mother mean when she said I owed her?" he asked after a long silence. The girl looked down. "She said once long ago you helped her. Before I was born. She said she never forgot." He tried again to recall, the memory fogged with years. He remembered the railway camps, the heat, the endless noise, and the faces of men who worked from dawn to dusk for little pay. He remembered a small tent where the workers took their meals, and a woman who ladled soup with careful hands, smiling at every man who thanked her. Could that have been Mei Lin? And if so, what debt had he owed her that she still remembered? What happened to her after the railroad? He asked softly. The girl hesitated, then spoke as if afraid of her own words. She married an American man, a storekeeper. But he died when I was little. After that, she cleaned houses in town. Some people liked her. Most didn't. They said she was bad luck. That she took jobs from white women. They'd whisper when we passed by. Sometimes they'd throw things. But Mama always told me to smile. She said hate was like mud. It sticks better if you stop moving. The rancher stared into the fire, the light glinting off his rough features. He had seen men driven by greed, anger, and envy, but hate, real hate, was something colder, emptier. It came from fear, and the town had plenty of that to spare. He didn't know why, but something in him stirred. A quiet pull that told him this girl didn't just need a roof for the night. She needed protection from something larger than the cruelty of a few townsfolk. Later, when she'd fallen asleep by the hearth, he stepped outside into the rain-washed night. The storm had passed, leaving the air sharp and clean. The moon hung low, silvering the wet grass and the old corral. He leaned on the rail, lost in thought. From the edge of the property he noticed movement. A rider in the distance, pausing by the fence line. The figure lingered there, watching. When the rancher reached for his lantern, the rider turned and vanished into the dark. The next morning, the girl woke before sunrise. She helped him with chores, feeding the chickens, fetching water from the well, even brushing down the horse. She didn't complain, just worked quietly, her movements careful but sure. "You ever been around animals before?" he asked. She nodded. "Mama used to help a farmer near town. He had horses. She said animals don't judge you like people do." He gave a faint smile. She was right about that. Around noon, the sound of wagon wheels echoed from the road. The rancher looked up and saw two men riding in, one of them the deputy from the river, the other the town mayor, a heavy-set man with slick hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning," the mayor said, climbing down from the wagon. "Heard you had company." The rancher didn't answer. The deputy's eyes flicked to the barn, then to the open door of the house. "That girl still here?" "What's it to you? She's got no kin." "The town don't want her wandering around. Folks are uneasy." "Uneasy about what?" The mayor stepped forward, lowering his voice. "You know how people are. It's not good for business, having that kind of trouble stirring up talk." "You understand?" The rancher's gaze hardened. "What I understand is a child came to my door asking for help. Until I know her mama's safe, she's staying here." The two men exchanged a glance. The mayor adjusted his coat and smiled again, but there was no warmth in it. "Suit yourself. But don't say you weren't warned. Sometimes it's better not to get mixed up in other folks' problems." They turned and left, the wagon rattling down the dirt road. The rancher stood watching them go, the girl's small figure visible behind the window curtain. She had seen everything. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the deputy's warning, the missing woman, and the strange connection between them. He remembered again that summer by the railroad, how Mei Lin had helped the sick when no one else would. How she'd cared for a wounded worker after a collapse. Maybe that was it. Maybe the debt wasn't his at all, but something passed down through kindness, something that demanded to be repaid when no one else dared. In the morning, he decided to ride into town. The girl begged to come, but he told her to stay. "If anyone comes asking, you don't answer the door. You hide in the cellar. Understand?" She nodded, though her eyes filled with worry. Willow Creek was quieter than usual when he rode in. The blacksmith gave him a nod but didn't speak. A few women near the general store turned away. The air felt heavier somehow, as if the whole town was pretending not to know what it did. He went straight to the sheriff's office. The deputy was there, leaning back in a chair with his boots on the desk. "Well, if it ain't the rancher come to stir things up," he said with a smirk. "Where's your boss?" "Out at the ridge checking fences. You can talk to me." "I'm looking for Mei Lin," the rancher said. "Her daughter says she was hurt. If you know something, best speak plain." The deputy's smirk faded. "She's gone. That's all anyone needs to know. Gone where?" "Buried, maybe. Or run off. Doesn't matter. Town's better off." The rancher's fist tightened at his sides. "You mean she's dead?" The deputy didn't answer. He only looked up, his eyes cold. "You best head home before you find yourself in trouble that ain't yours." When the rancher left, he could feel eyes following him down the street. Someone had painted words across the side of the old mercantile. No foreigners, no trouble. The paint was fresh. He rode back fast, the sun dipping low, shadows stretching long across the fields. As he neared the ranch, a new sound reached him, a sharp cry from the direction of the barn. He spurred his horse forward and found the door wide open, the hay scattered, the girl gone. On the ground near the entrance lay the shawl he'd given her, half buried in the dirt. And beside it, pressed into the mud, was the clear imprint of a man's boot. He lifted the shawl, his throat tightening. The wind carried the faint echo of hooves fading into the distance. He didn't need anyone to tell him who had come. Somewhere out there, between the river and the town, secrets were being buried, and he knew that if he didn't find the girl soon, she'd vanish the same way her mother had. He saddled his horse again, the fading light bleeding red across the sky. The land felt different now, colder, as if it too held its breath, waiting to see what he would do next. He rode toward the hills, where the horizon glowed like embers, and the truth waited beneath layers of silence and fear. Somewhere ahead the storm was gathering again. The sun was already dipping low behind the cottonwoods when the rancher followed the trail leading away from his barn. The wind had turned colder, scraping across the land with the smell of rain still clinging to it. He rode hard, eyes scanning the tracks left in the damp soil. There were two sets of prints, the small ones belonging to the girl, the heavier ones of a man's boots. The marks cut deep into the earth, heading toward the old mine road that hadn't seen much use in years. He urged his horse forward, jaw tight, mind racing. Every sound on the prairie felt sharper, the creak of saddle leather, the whistle of the wind through dry grass, the distant caw of a crow circling above. The closer he got to the foothills, the clearer the story in the dirt became. The girl hadn't gone willingly. Her tracks were uneven, as if she'd been dragged or stumbled in the struggle. By the time he reached the ridge, the light had fallen to a dull gray. He dismounted and crouched near a patch of trampled weeds, noticing a scrap of cloth snagged on a thorn bush. It was part of her dress. The thread still held the faint scent of smoke from his hearth. His throat tightened. From somewhere up ahead came the faint crack of a branch. He turned sharply, hand instinctively resting on the revolver at his side. But when he moved toward the sound, it wasn't a man waiting for him. It was a small figure stepping out from behind a tree. An old woman. She was bent with age, her shawl pulled tight against the wind. Her eyes, though clouded, still held a sharpness that made him pause. "You're looking for the girl," she said quietly, as though she already knew. He nodded. "You've seen her?" The woman's gaze drifted toward the direction of the abandoned mines. "A wagon passed not long ago, 2 men. One of them wears a badge he doesn't deserve." The rancher's stomach sank. "The deputy," she nodded. "They're taking her to the old mill. Folks in town say they're cleaning it out, but I've lived long enough to know when people are hiding something. They don't want anyone finding the woman either. The mother. She saw something she shouldn't have." "What did she see?" he asked. The woman's voice lowered to a whisper. "Something to do with the mayor. The land, maybe. There's money in it. The railroad's coming again, they say. And some men will do anything to keep what they think is theirs." He felt the chill cut deeper through him. Land and money. That was always the root of it. But it didn't make sense why Mei Lin or her daughter had been caught in it, unless she had proof, something that could expose what the mayor and his men were doing. The old woman's hand trembled as she pointed toward the hills. "Be careful, rancher. You go in there alone, you might not come out." He tipped his hat, thanked her, and mounted his horse again. The trail to the mill wound through a stretch of land the town had long abandoned. The old wooden building sat half sunk near the creek, windows boarded, its roof sagging with rot. When he got close enough, he tied his horse to a tree and crept through the underbrush. A faint glow came from inside, lantern light. He could hear muffled voices and the clink of metal. He crouched behind a pile of old lumber and listened. "We can't keep her here long," one man said. It was the deputy's voice. "If she talks, the mayor's finished. She's just a kid," another voice replied. "What's she gonna prove?" The deputy spat. "She's got her mama's tongue. You think I'm risking everything for some little half-breed girl who doesn't know her place?" The rancher's blood went cold. He gripped the edge of the wood tighter, fighting the urge to storm in. But then came a softer sound, a sob. The girl was inside. He moved carefully, circling the building until he found a small window half covered with broken planks. Through the gap, he saw her tied to a chair, her face pale but defiant. A bruise darkened her temple, but her eyes still burned with that same stubborn fire. The deputy paced back and forth, his hand resting on his gun. Once the rain comes again, we'll dump her by the river. No one will question it. Just like her mother, the rancher froze. The truth hit him like a strike of lightning. Melin hadn't vanished. They'd killed her. He stepped back, heart pounding, every thought turning sharp with anger. But before he could plan his next move, a voice came from behind him. You shouldn't be here. He spun around. A young man stood there, one of the townsfolk, the blacksmith's apprentice if he remembered right. The boy held a rifle, but his hands shook. They said you'd come, the boy whispered. They're watching the roads. You can't save her alone. The rancher studied him. Then help me, the boy hesitated. If they find out, they'll kill her. Maybe both of us, but you already know that. The boy's jaw worked, fear and guilt warring behind his eyes. After a long moment, he nodded. There's a back door by the grain chute. I can cut the ropes if you distract them. The rancher gave a curt nod. Make it quick. The boy slipped away into the shadows while the rancher circled back to the front. He waited for the sound of a creaking board, a signal, and then he kicked the door open, stepping inside with the force of a storm. The deputy's hand went straight for his gun, but the rancher fired first, hitting the lantern instead. Flames burst up, throwing sparks across the room. The light flickered wildly, blinding them for a second. The girl screamed his name, her voice breaking through the noise. Go, he shouted, shoving over a barrel as cover. The boy ran forward, slashing at the ropes with his knife. The girl stumbled to her feet, just as the deputy lunged at the rancher. The two men collided, struggling in the smoke and heat. The deputy's rage was feral, desperate. You should have stayed on your land, he snarled. And you should have stayed honest, the rancher growled back, slamming him into a beam. The fight was brutal but short. A crash from behind broke it apart. The ceiling gave a groan, sending dust and splinters raining down. The fire climbed higher, licking the wooden walls. The rancher grabbed the girl's arm and pulled her toward the door. The boy followed, coughing, his face streaked with soot. Outside, the night air hit them like ice. The girl clung to him, gasping, while behind them the old mill burned, flames reflecting off the creek like twisted gold. They didn't stop until they reached the trees. Only then did the girl speak, her voice shaking. Mama said they took something from her. Papers. She said it would show what the mayor did. What papers? She hid them. By the river. The rancher looked toward the distant glow of town lights. The truth was out there, buried under fear and greed. The men who ran Willow Creek weren't just cruel. They were protecting something worth killing for. The boy glanced back toward the fire. They'll say you did it, he said. They'll come for you now, the rancher nodded grimly. Then I guess I'll be ready. They returned to the ranch by dawn, exhausted and covered in soot. The girl barely stayed awake long enough to eat a few bites before falling asleep by the hearth. The boy stayed by the door, too shaken to speak much. As the sun rose over the horizon, the rancher stepped out onto the porch, looking over the wide stretch of land that had once felt safe. It didn't anymore. In the distance, a column of riders was approaching. The glint of badges flashed in the light. The deputy might have been dead or wounded, but the others would be coming to finish what he'd started. He turned back toward the house. The girl was still asleep, her small hand clutching the edge of the shawl. She looked peaceful for the first time since he'd met her. He couldn't let them take that away. Inside, the boy stood uncertain. What will you do? The rancher looked at the rifle hanging over the fireplace, then out toward the open land. Whatever I have to. The sound of horses grew louder, closer. Dust lifted on the horizon. He knew he couldn't fight the whole town, but he also knew that if he didn't stand for her now, no one ever would. Somewhere by the river, the answers waited, the papers, the truth, maybe even the memory of Mei Lin herself. The girl stirred, murmuring something in her sleep, a word in her mother's language, soft and aching. He didn't understand it, but somehow he knew what it meant. He took one last look at the road before stepping inside, closing the door behind him as the first shouts echoed through the valley. The storm hadn't passed. It was only beginning. The morning light came thin and pale over the plains, brushing the land in gray. The rancher stood by the window, staring at the dust trail rising on the horizon. The riders were closing in. He could count at least 6. Men from town, maybe more. Some wearing badges, some just carrying guns and the look of those who wanted trouble. He knew what they wanted. The fire at the mill had burned away whatever story they'd planned to spin, and now they needed someone to blame. Inside the cabin, the girl was awake, sitting by the hearth with her shawl wrapped tight. She hadn't spoken much since the night before. Her eyes followed every sound, every creak of the boards, like a small animal bracing for danger. The young blacksmith's apprentice, Tom, she'd said his name was, stood near the door, holding the rifle like he wasn't sure whether to fight or run. "They'll be here soon," the rancher said quietly, watching the line of riders. "Once they find the mill gone, they'll come asking questions." Tom swallowed hard. "They won't just ask," the rancher nodded. "I know." He turned from the window and began moving through the room, checking the rifle by the table, the pistol at his belt. The girl's voice broke through the silence, soft but firm. "You can't fight them all." He paused, looking at her. "I don't plan to fight if I don't have to. But I won't let them take you either." Her lips pressed tight, trembling, and for a moment she looked like she might cry. But she didn't. She just looked at the fire again, whispering, "Mama said people show their hearts when fear finds them." The rancher felt those words sink deep, heavier than any bullet. The sound of horses grew louder, echoing off the dry hills. He stepped onto the porch. The air carried the faint smell of smoke from the burned mill, mixed with the sharp scent of iron from the blacksmith boy's trembling hands. The riders slowed as they reached the fence line. The mayor rode at the front, his fine coat dusted from travel but his face still holding that same false smile. Behind him, the deputy sat hunched, his arm bandaged, eyes full of hate. "Morning, rancher," the mayor called out. "Heard there was some trouble last night. Care to explain why half the town's property went up in flames?" The rancher kept his voice steady. "Maybe ask your deputy. He was the one there." The deputy's eyes narrowed. "You're one word away from hanging, old man." The rancher said nothing. The mayor dismounted, brushing his coat. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. That girl you've been keeping, she doesn't belong here. She's causing division in my town. You hand her over, and we can all forget this mess." The rancher's jaw tightened. "She's a child," the mayor's voice dropped. "She's evidence." "That's worse." The air between them grew still. The wind had died, leaving only the sound of the horses shifting restlessly. Inside, Tom could hear every word. He looked at the girl, whose small fingers were clenched tight in her lap. She whispered, "They'll kill him if he doesn't let me go." Tom's stomach turned. He wanted to believe there was still some good in those men outside, but he'd seen the way the deputy had smiled when the mill burned. He'd heard how the mayor talked about land that wasn't his, and now he knew they'd already crossed the line long ago. The rancher stepped down from the porch, his boots sinking in the dirt. "You won't find her here," he said, the deputy spat. "You're lying." "Search if you want," the rancher said, his hand resting lightly on the revolver at his hip. "But you step on this land, you better be ready to back it up." The mayor's smile faded. "You think you can stand against the law?" "I think I can stand against men pretending to be it." For a long moment, no one moved. Then the deputy raised his rifle and the horses stirred, uneasy. Inside, Tom looked at the girl. "We need to go," he whispered. "Now," she shook her head. "He'll die." Tom grabbed her hand anyway. "Then let's make sure it means something." They slipped out through the back door, crouching low as they ran toward the old root cellar behind the barn. The girl's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. Every breath burned. Every step felt like a gamble. When they reached the cellar, Tom pried the door open and motioned for her to go inside. "Wait here," he said. "If they come, don't make a sound." "Where are you going?" "To help him." He shut the door before she could stop him. Back in the yard, the tension finally broke. The deputy fired a warning shot that splintered the post near the rancher's shoulder. The horses bolted sideways, snorting, and the mayor shouted something that got lost in the noise. The rancher dropped behind the water trough and fired once, the bullet grazing the deputy's arm. Tom ran toward the barn, grabbing another rifle from the wall and ducking behind the doorframe. His hands shook as he reloaded, but his aim held true. He fired into the air, hoping to scare them back. The mayor ducked, shouting, "You'll hang for this!" The rancher shouted back, "For what? Defending my land? Protecting a child you all tried to kill?" The mayor didn't answer. The deputy barked orders, sending 2 men around the side. The rancher fired again, hitting the ground near their boots, forcing them to stop. For several minutes, the air filled with dust, shouting, and gun smoke. Then silence. The riders pulled back, regrouping near the fence. The mayor straightened, breathing hard. "This won't end here. The railroad men arrive tomorrow. Once they hear about this, your land's gone. You'll be finished, and no one will remember that girl or her mother." The rancher's voice was low and steady. "Maybe, but they'll remember the truth." The mayor turned his horse and rode off, the others following. The deputy lingered a moment longer, glaring back with cold fury. "You should have stayed out of this," he said. "You've got no idea what you've started." Then he spat in the dirt and galloped after the others. When the sound of hooves faded, the rancher let out a slow breath. His arm burned from a graze he hadn't noticed, and smoke from the gunfire still stung his lungs. Tom came out from the barn, pale but alive. "You all right?" the rancher asked. Tom nodded. "They'll be back, I know." He walked toward the barn and opened the cellar door. The girl was curled up inside, eyes wide, trembling. When she saw him, she climbed out and threw her arms around him, clinging like she was afraid he'd vanish. He rested his hand on her back, silent for a long time. That night, no one slept. The rancher sat at the table with an oil lamp burning low, maps and papers spread out before him. He kept thinking about what the girl had said, about her mother hiding proof by the river. Maybe that was the key to everything. If they could find it, maybe they could finally show what the mayor and his men had done. At dawn, he saddled his horse again. "Stay here," he told Tom and the girl. "If I'm not back by sundown, ride north. Don't stop till you reach the old trading post. There's folks there who still remember right from wrong." The girl grabbed his arm. "You can't go alone." "I have to," he said. "This ends where it started." The river lay still when he reached it, the water low from summer heat. He searched along the bank, near the rocks where he'd first found the torn fabric. After some time, he saw a patch of disturbed earth half hidden by reeds. He dug with his hands until his fingers hit something hard, a small tin box, rusted but intact. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were several papers, deeds, contracts, and letters signed by the mayor himself. Plans for selling land that wasn't his, land meant for railroad expansion. The signatures were proof of fraud, maybe worse. He stared at the papers, realizing now why Mei Lin had been silenced. She'd worked for the mayor's office. She must have found the documents and tried to warn someone. Maybe she'd come to him once before, all those years ago, trusting he'd help. And now, through her daughter, that trust had come full circle. But before he could move, a sound broke through the quiet, a twig snapping behind him. He turned just in time to see the glint of sunlight off a revolver. The deputy stepped out from the trees, his wounded arm still in a sling, his expression twisted in anger. "You really should have listened," he said. The rancher's hand moved to his holster, but the deputy was faster. The shot echoed across the valley, scattering birds from the trees. The rancher fell to one knee, clutching his side. The deputy kicked the tin box away, grabbing it up with his good hand. "You think you can undo men like us? You're just one fool on a dying ranch." The rancher gritted his teeth, forcing himself upright. "Maybe so, but even a dying rancher can bite." Another shot cracked through the air, this time not from him, but from somewhere up the hill. The deputy staggered, his hat flying off as a bullet tore past his shoulder. He looked up, eyes wide, as Tom came running down the slope, rifle in hand. "Run!" Tom shouted. The rancher stumbled toward his horse, blood seeping through his shirt, pain hot and sharp. The deputy cursed, firing wildly. The river echoed with chaos, the splash of hooves, the crack of gunfire, the shouts of men. And above it all, the sky darkened again, heavy with clouds, as if the storm was returning to witness the truth finally claw its way into the open. The rancher gripped the papers against his chest as he rode, knowing this was the turning point. Everything, the girl, her mother, the town, would either burn or be reborn before the next sunrise. The wind carried the scent of rain as the rancher rode hard through the valley, the sound of hooves echoing off the riverbanks. His vision blurred from pain, but he held on, clutching the tin box against his chest like it was life itself. Behind him, Tom's voice called out, urging him to keep going. The deputy's shots grew faint as the storm began to break over the plains, thunder rolling low and heavy. By the time they reached the ridge above the ranch, the rain had started. The sky was streaked with silver lightning and the land smelled of dust and renewal. The girl ran out from the cabin, her dress whipping in the wind. When she saw the rancher slumped over his saddle, she cried out and ran toward him. Tom jumped down first, helping him to the porch. Blood had soaked through the old man's shirt, but his eyes were still steady. "I got what we needed," he said, pressing the tin box into Tom's hands. "You keep it safe. It's proof, everything they've done. The land deals, the lies, the threats. It's all in there." Tom's hands trembled as he opened the box, rain dripping over the papers. He looked at the signatures, the seals, the letters, all real. This will clear your name," he said. The rancher gave a faint smile. "It's not my name that needs clearing, son. It's hers," he nodded toward the girl. "Her mother died trying to bring the truth to light. Make sure the world finally hears her story." Lightning flashed and thunder shook the hills. The girl knelt beside him, holding his hand. "You're going to be all right," she whispered, as if saying it could make it true. He didn't answer. His breath came slow, rough. He looked out at the land he had fought so long to protect, the broken fence, the soaked earth, the barn standing stubborn against the storm. "Promise me," he said, barely above a whisper. "Don't let them take this place. Don't let them win." Tom nodded, his voice thick. "I promise." The old man's hand tightened for a moment, then went still. The rain came harder, hiding the tears that fell freely from both of them. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the land washed clean. The air smelled of wet sage and smoke. They buried the rancher under the old cottonwood near the river, the same place he had once found the cloth that led to everything. Tom carved a simple cross from a fence post and placed it at the head of the grave. The girl laid a handful of wildflowers beside it, her small voice carrying in the morning wind. "Thank you," she whispered. For days, the town buzzed with rumors. The mayor had vanished the night after the storm, leaving his office locked and his house abandoned. The deputy's body was found near the riverbank, the tin box gone. Some said he had been swept away by the flood. Others whispered that the truth had caught up with him before the water did. Tom took the papers to the territorial judge in the nearest city. It took weeks of questioning and threats, but when the truth finally came out, the scandal reached far beyond their small town. The mayor's name was printed in every newspaper, his false deeds stripped away. The land that had been stolen was returned, and the railroad company pulled out, unwilling to be tied to corruption. The girl stayed with Tom through it all. She helped mend fences, feed the horses, and care for the ranch as if it were her own. She grew quieter after the trial, as though part of her had stayed buried beneath that cottonwood tree. But at night, when the stars came out, she would tell stories of her mother, how she used to hum while she worked, how she'd believed that truth always found its way home. Tom listened every time. The ranch began to breathe again, slowly coming back to life. New grass grew where the fire had scarred the land, and calves were born in the spring. The neighbors who had once turned away began to visit again, bringing food, tools, and company. Some apologized for their silence. Others simply helped rebuild the barn without saying a word. Years passed, and the girl became a young woman. The ranch changed too, but the cottonwood by the river never did. Its branches spread wide, and every spring the wildflowers grew thick around its roots. One evening, Tom found her sitting there sketching the river in a small notebook. "You still draw?" he asked, smiling. She nodded. "Mama used to draw rivers, said they carry stories farther than people ever could." Tom sat beside her, looking out over the land. "She was right, and your story's gone farther than you think." She looked at him, her eyes bright with something between gratitude and sadness. "Do you ever miss him?" "Every day," he said softly. "But I think he'd be proud. The land's still ours. The truth's still alive. And you—" He paused, smiling faintly. "You've got her strength." The wind rustled through the cottonwood, whispering through the leaves like a voice carried from another time. They sat in silence, the sound of the river filling the space between words. When the town rebuilt its church, they placed a small plaque inside for those who had fought to keep the light of truth alive. The rancher's name was there, along with May Lynn's. People brought their children to see it, to remind them that courage sometimes came from the quietest souls. Tom never left the ranch. He kept working the land, growing old beneath the same skies that had watched everything unfold. And the girl, now a woman, became known for her kindness and her strength. She took in strays, helped the neighbors, and opened the ranch gates to travelers who had nowhere else to go. Some nights, she would tell them the story of the rancher who stood against men who thought they owned the world, and the mother who risked everything to tell the truth. And when they asked how it ended, she would smile and say, "It didn't. It just became part of the land." Years later, after Tom had passed on too, she found herself sitting alone by the river again, the same place where everything had begun and ended. The tin box, now rusted and worn, sat beside her. She opened it one last time, running her fingers over the old papers and faded ink. Then she tucked them back inside and buried it beneath the roots of the cottonwood, letting the earth take back its story. As the sun dipped low behind the hills, she looked out across the land that had once been soaked in fear and fire. Now it was quiet, alive with wind and grass and the sound of crickets. She felt peace, the kind that came only after long years of carrying truth. In that silence, she could almost hear the rancher's voice again, calm and steady. "Don't let them win." She smiled. Whispering to the horizon, they didn't. The light faded, and the land held its breath. The wind carried her words over the fields, across the river, into the quiet heart of the valley. In the town nearby, children still played near the old mill ruins, their laughter mixing with the hum of the evening air. Some said if you listened closely, you could hear a faint echo of hoofbeats on the wind, a reminder of the man who had once stood alone against the storm. The ranch still stood tall, weathered, but strong. The cottonwood tree by the river swayed gently, its roots deep, its branches reaching high toward the stars. It had seen fire and rain, loss and forgiveness. It had seen the truth come to light. And the land find peace again, and beneath its shade the story of courage, sacrifice, and redemption lived on, not in words carved on a plaque, but in the quiet lives of those who kept the land alive, honest and free. That was the rancher's legacy. That was the truth that could never be buried.